Good afternoon, Beans.
Good afternoon, Scholar.
Welcome to BeansTalk, ladies and gentlemen. We are here with another episode 7. We're in episode 7. Did you think we'd get this far, Beans?
Yes, but I thought it would be our last episode, and we'd be like old people by now,
You
and we
think
would have made one episode like every 5 decades or something.
just not committed at all? No, commitment. We're going all the way, everyone. We have a very special episode because we have a guest, because every episode is special because every guest is special. I thought, I
Thanks,
thought,
Scholar.
I thought that would be a nice little touch.
Yeah, that
Um,
was beautiful. That was
we
beautiful.
have today for our episode 7 guest, we have Mary Weber-Hess. Mary, say hi to the audience.
Hello. I'm
Beautiful. Hello. Sorry.
not good at this.
Yeah,
No, you got this.
Mary is a senior at St. Joe, as Beans and I are, and she's, number of things to talk about with her. One that we'd like to kind of introduce right off the bat is she's definitely known for a bunch of Scholastic submissions. If y'all don't know what Scholastic is, well, it's kind of hard to describe because she's submitted both writing and art to Scholastic competitions. So if she wants to talk about a little bit of her art or writing.
I can just start off by giving just like a brief crash course on what Scholastic is. It's a writing and art composite competition that's nationwide, and through 7th through senior year of high school, you can submit both art and writing, which is judged regionally, and then if you receive gold regionally, will go on to be judged nationally. I have been submitting writing pieces to Scholastic since I was in 7th grade. And I just started submitting art last year and received a gold key for one of my pieces, which went on to receive a silver national key for, which I went on to receive a silver national key for. It's a lot of fun, and it's a good way to expose yourself to different media, as well as kind of just see how far you can get. It's a lot of fun, and something that I would encourage anyone who's still within the time range to participate in.
Yeah,
Well, that's cool.
it's a really fun. Oh, go ahead, Beans.
Oh, sorry. So back in 7th grade, so I don't even remember like any of my teachers talking about it. So like, what really got you into Scholastic back in 7th grade?
So 7th grade, I had one of my absolute favorite English teachers. Her name was Mrs. Regnery, and she encouraged me to submit some of my short writing pieces. I really enjoy writing flash fiction, which is a shorter piece than most short stories, between about 500 and 1,500 words. And I wrote a piece called, if I'm remembering correctly, The Men Who Come in the Dark of Night, which was a horror flash fiction that I particularly enjoyed, as well as a extended metaphor poem that I had written, which went on to receive gold regionally, then went on to receive a silver national award called Dust Bunnies. She was one of the teachers who really encouraged my love of writing and encouraged me to think outside of how I usually wrote, and to expand beyond what I thought I could write, and to try many new things to explore the many possibilities there are in writing.
Well, yeah, that's something really cool. Is that like, yeah, it's that when you're that young, like it's really the teachers that are able to push you into these things. And yeah, I'll even like school. Have you ever had an experience like that where you get pushed towards something extracurricular by a teacher like this?
I can't think of too much. Well, I guess extracurricular. Honestly, I remember freshman year when I wrote my spoken word poem, and Miss Closer told me you should definitely submit this, and I didn't, just because I was a freshman and I was like, I'm a freshman. But honestly, I wish I had, because I remember submitting. I think I submitted something the year after in Foster's class, and I don't know if I won anything, but it still felt cool to submit something to something so big. I do wish I had submitted that poem, but yeah, I've had many experiences where I've been pushed to submit something or do something extra, and I either did it or didn't. But either way, you're right. It's very phenomenal how that young, really, it's the teachers who can push you, or anyone in a authority or guiding, mentoring position.
It's so important for especially kids in like 6th, 7th, 8th grade when you're really not as confident as you can be in your skills to have an adult authority figure, teacher, parent, coach, whatever it is to encourage, like, yeah, you can keep doing this. You don't have to conform to the general consensus to be good or at whether it's writing, art, even sports to a certain extent, though I don't have much experience in that. Um, Having someone who's going to encourage you and say, yeah, you're doing well, don't stop now, is so important.
Yeah, and it
Yeah,
seemed to definitely it's definitely helped you apparently. I mean, it's won you a few awards, just a couple with your writing. I mean, with writing too, but you also, you mentioned before we started recording, you also submitted some art pieces.
Mm-hmm. I've been doing ceramic and various 3D forms of art since probably 3rd or 4th grade. I participated in a couple summers of the South Bend Museum of Art ceramics program, which really kind of started my love of ceramics and working with clay and that sort of media. And then took 3, possibly 4 summers of working with the St. Joe High 3D art summer camp, which was with Mrs. Coleman, who really encouraged me to continue working with that. And I started taking the classes, the 3D art classes with Mr. Kuharek, my sophomore year. And it was at the end of my sophomore year, I think. Was the first year I submitted, and I submitted more my junior year. So I've been submitting them for the past 2 years. But there's just so much variety in art that I have never been terribly great at the 2D side of art. About average, honestly, but finding a completely different media to work in was amazing, to find something that I could relate better to. And I think there's a shortcoming in a lot of how art gets talked about in grade school and high school, is that we forget about the 3D side of stuff. And that's a whole, if you don't think you're necessarily good at the 2D media, drawing, painting, that sort of thing, taking a stab at 3D is a completely different, you're incorporating 2D, but it's much more like tactile. It's that you're really working. It's much more structural, like physical structures. And it, I lost where I was going with that.
no, yeah, it definitely makes sense. A lot of people need to be able to, like, I don't know, physically have something in their hands, you know.
It's a lot easier to see, at least for myself, to see where I'm going with something. Whereas if I'm looking at a blank canvas or a blank sheet, it's like, I don't see anything there. There's supposed to be painting or like a person or a bowl of fruit. I don't know what's going on here. It's just
Yeah, and a lot of times when you're trying to use good techniques, you might not even see anything until you're like 2/3 through. Then you're like, are these lines right? I don't know. Yeah.
Big general colors in the right direction, possibly.
Yeah.
So, Mary, do you have like a favorite piece that you've done specifically with art? I guess you could talk a little about your favorite writing piece too, if you want.
Excuse me. Art. So one of the pieces I'm really proud of, structurally, because it was more difficult to create, was a piece that was a ceramic whale, actually, that I created for one of the projects in Mr. Kuharik's class, which was a lot more detail work than I had previously worked with. I'd been working on bigger scales with more simple ideas, whereas the whale itself had a lot more details than I had previously been working with, and it turned out incredibly well. One of the things I really like to work with when I'm working in ceramics is the glazing, because I love working with color. Because there's only so much you can impart with shape itself. Color is something that we as humans react to strongly, to the point that we associate strong image experiences in humanity to colors, often war and death with red, but also love and with red. The concept that black is evil or death, but it is also the richness of soil, like good farming soil is rich and black and dark. The dichotomy between color is something I love working with, because there's so many different things you can impart through color. And one of the pieces I made most recently and actually received a national award for was a piece I titled Waiting for Happiness. It was a throne bowl that had been cracked and malformed, that had a cascade of cigarettes and pills in, and kind of what the false happiness we try to achieve through things that at the end of the day really may be a pacifier, but don't really give that long lasting, deep in the gut joy that we are often searching for. But the glazing itself was something that I wasn't entirely sure how to work with, because the cigarettes were easy. It was like you have a set color palette for, but the pills, like what colors do I do traditional like pharmaceutical, so like that industrial blue, some bright oranges, which I did end up using, but mostly ended up being white and that industrial orange. So it kind of connected with the cigarettes themselves, but the bowl itself ended up being a speckled, dull green, gray, yellowy color that kind of is reminiscent of old asylum walls, I guess, in my mind, from pictures, like seeing what color pictures of old mental institutions, that color, that the walls that should have been probably cleaned a bit more than they had been, giving that kind of ickiness of like something that had been cleaned but is no longer being maintained or taken care of. Kind of reminiscent of what I was trying to say. It's like, yeah, it may have been good to begin with, but a lot of things that we use to nullify the pain in our lives end up causing more harm than good, is kind of but just looking at the piece without the color, you wouldn't have gotten that kind of emotion out of that. Taking color out of something completely changes a piece, an object. It's a lot of fun to work with, and that's one of probably my favorite pieces that I've made so far.
Holy crap, Beans. I wasn't expecting to nearly cry today. That was a lot. I have seen that piece. I didn't know it was you, actually. But I've seen that displayed in the art hallway. It's a good piece, but I didn't think about it as much as I did now. I honestly was like, it's just a cool little cigarette ashtray or something, or with some pills. It's wow.
Yeah, that was really cool, especially how you talked about color, because I think that's something that we miss a lot of times, how much can be conveyed through such a simple thing as color. And that's something that's really like accessible to you in the 3D medium because, you know, it's just a bunch of shapes, but those shapes mean something. Those give us visceral reactions. And so that can be exploited to the artist and giving you a lot of information in just a little bowl, you know?
It gives you a lot of surface to work with, and but also gives you a variety of surfaces to work with, so you're not stuck with a single flat piece of paper or piece of canvas.
So you enjoy 3D art probably a little more than you do 2D art, just because you can do a little more with it, you think?
I love 3D art. I also love the intersection with 2D art, doing perhaps having a more simple form of a base that just has straight walls, but then doing more traditionally 2D art onto that is a lot of fun. I like the intersection between things. I really enjoy 2D art because of its frankly its intersection with a lot of engineering concepts, and which is something I've been interested in but never fully stuck to because I found it lacking in the more creative side of things. But there's so many things that you can apply across fields between math and science and art and writing languages that can all be conveyed in a single ceramic piece because you're using math to scale things, you're using engineering to principles to make sure things structurally stay the way you want them to. Like there's so many things that we forget, I think, that overlap, are treated as their own bubbles with that never touch. But so many more things in life overlap than we think they do or acknowledge that they do. And I feel like art is a really good midpoint in a lot of things.
I think that, I mean, this might sound absurd, but that kind of reminds me of the way that we look at the internet as like, oh, someone's internet famous, but they're not real famous. But like, the internet is a part of our reality, you know, like, and so like the things we do on there matter in the real world because, you know, it's like saying something. So even though it changes the way we approach our communication with other people, like 3D art versus like 2D art, it's still we're still communicating with people, and we're still still reality. Basically, what I'm saying.
It's all reality, no matter what media or form you're using to communicate it, whether it be a 150 character text or a 10 by 10 foot canvas that's hanging in the MoMA. It's all a form of communication, and I think that it's a bad idea to play down a form of communication because of its newness. That's not a great word for it, but like it's like because it's new or because it doesn't last. I put that in air quotes.
Or like simplicity or something.
Or because of its simplicity, that it's still communicating emotion and thought, even if it's not it's not a Picasso, it's not the Mona Lisa, it's not the Declaration of Independence, it's not Shakespeare. Doesn't mean there isn't emotion that can be connected to universally.
Yeah, I think specifically because you mentioned how sometimes it could be downplayed because it's a painting. I see it once, it's simple, then I can move on. I mean, honestly, that's how I used to feel like when I was like little. But that's how I would feel like I would much rather like read like I didn't like reading in general, but I would much rather like read a story in order to maybe find something interesting than like look at a picture for a little bit. But now it's completely different. There could be many words on one painting and absolutely no meaning in some other piece of writing. I mean, it's all the same. Not all the same, but it's all on the same level, I think.
There's as much meaning in something as you're willing to look for. I think is the best way to put it. Because you could be looking at a beautiful painting, and if you're not like looking at it like more than just a cursory glance, you're not going to really find that much meaning. You can read the most beautiful poem in the world, but if you're not thinking about it, it could be nothing more than chicken scratch. There's a lot to be said that we put a lot of meaning into things that have none, and we ignore a lot of meaning in things that, however simple, however supposedly unimportant, we just choose to ignore because it's not comfortable or it doesn't fit the way we see the world.
Yeah, that is kind of an interesting, like that kind of gets into the marketing aspects of art when you have like a piece that just doesn't really get off the ground versus a piece that might not mean as much, but you were able to reach a bunch of people and get a solid fan base. They're going to start theorizing all of these crazy things, and they can't all be right, and so they're going to theorize a lot of just crazy stuff about, yeah, some random piece of art. So it can be tough. It feels like we have a very like unbalanced spread of like artistic popularity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of meaning that's taken, that a lot of the meaning that you look for in art and writing is in the eye of the viewer. So a lot of times, as both an artist and a writer, you work in generalities. You work in universal themes that can apply to as many people as you can, to attempt to share information or emotion, which can get you in trouble because you can end up working in stereotypes, which often can lead you into the weeds in not a good way. But then if you work on the other side of the spectrum with incredibly specific emotions or ideas, you can lose the big picture of what you're trying to communicate. If you're specifying every little detail, you can both lose your audience and lose what you're trying to communicate. It's finding a balance between being hyper specific and being so general that you're just restating what's been said half a dozen times, 1,000 times. It's a balancing act that can scare off people who don't work as complexly.
Yeah, I think that she's got a point to what she's saying because, like, especially with the dawn of YouTube, we have like a kind of philosophy thing where people look at artists as people very much like themselves and like people really trying to relate to artists. And with YouTube, we see people thinking that they actually know these YouTubers because these YouTubers make videos and talk to them. And so, yeah, and so it's kind of become like a game of how much can I get all of these people to feel like they're relating specifically to me, like to feel like they're going through the exact same thing as me. Yeah.
Finding relatability is, no matter what your profession is, whether you're a politician, whether you're an artist, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a CEO, finding relatability is how we interact. Being like, oh, I've gone through X experience, you've gone through Y experience, but they're close enough that we can relate to each other. It's all about, humanity is about making connections. And there's so many different ways that we make connections, whether it be through writing something and having someone read that 100 years later. Like, the fact that Shakespeare is still so relatable today is a testament to how good he was as a writer, as someone who could look at the general ideas of things and see that's been happening and happening and happening, and storylines that have worked through society for hundreds of years, and like I can use that. I can make this relatable to not only me, not only London at the time he was writing, but also halfway across the world. And that's something often can feel like I'm not writing Shakespeare, so it's not any good, which is a pitfall that I found myself in, that I've seen other people write. It's like, what I'm writing isn't Shakespeare. It isn't. I can't name any well-known writer. It's like, it's not that, so therefore I'm not good enough, is a pitfall that is easy to fall into, but ignores the fact that you have a different perspective that can take what they've been thinking about and change it to be even more relatable to what we're living in today.
Yeah, that's kind of funny because that just reminds me of the scene from what was it, Little Women, where the Frenchman's like talking to her and he's talking about Shakespeare, and she's like, "Well, I'm not Shakespeare," and he's like, "Thank goodness we already have him." And so
Yeah,
yeah,
I haven't seen
so yeah,
kind of the idea.
definitely don't try to get caught up in trying to be these other writers or artists.
Right.
Yeah, and I think
Another
oh, go ahead, Beans.
Well, I was just gonna say another thing I find interesting is like relatability. What I've been trying to do, I've been wanting to do with my art, and like I write a little bit, is trying to find characters, create characters that I like strongly disagree with, that most people would disagree with, and then try to force them, try to make them very relatable, so that people will be able to look at them and say, "This is how this person got to this situation. This person's still just like me, but they've just made mistakes in their lives." So I think that's a big power of art, is that it allows us to relate to people who we wouldn't normally relate to, because we normally don't have such a strong view into someone else's brain, but when we're like reading something that they wrote or looking at something that we made, we can understand them so much more.
Yeah, and I think what I was going to say is like it's basically what we keep talking about. There's such a fine line between being inspired by someone and then being obsessed with becoming what that person is. You don't have to be what that person is. If you want to, okay, but don't make it just consume you. If you want to try to do what they do, okay, but I mean, be healthy with it.
Like recognizing that, oh, this author, this artist, this influencer has influenced me in how I create my art, my media, is good to say, like, oh, I've taken my love for strange words from reading Lovecraft. I've taken my love of storytelling from one of my favorite authors, Terry Pratchett, the way he tells stories, but also recognizing that, okay, how do I form my own way of writing that not only pays homage to these authors, but also writes in my own way that isn't trying to just copy the exact same style. Um, because I'm not Lovecraft, I'm not Pratchett, I'm writing something from the age I'm writing in, 2020, 2000s, whatever, as a female writer in a world that has changed a lot since Lovecraft's been writing. And writing in art from different authors, like, oh, they did that really well. How can I look at that and do something similar in my art or in my writing? Is good as taking art that we've seen in both writing and paintings and such, and using them as teachers to learn and expand how we create. Uh, and when you were talking about your writing, Ben, it was making me think about how books and art, podcasts, news media, to a certain extent, allows us to see inside other people's mind who we may never talk to, who we would not go out of our way to understand. But by creating characters who we fundamentally disagree with, by reading about characters who we fundamentally disagree with, we can relate to them and see their humanity often better times than we can see the humanity of other people we're interacting with, because you're not interacting in the same high stakes situations that you would be with another person. It allows you to interact in a way that's safer than actually interacting with other people. And I think that's really important, that we read and take in media from different perspectives, from different places around the world, to understand the humanity of us all and how we are often more related than we are different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was kind of a closer on that one. Yeah, that's very, because I think that in today's internet world, we kind of do get like separated a lot, and like, yeah, I think that we really need to start and really encouraging people to use the internet to be able to reach these new views. Like we often talk about that in our English class, which maybe this might be a segue to that, but like how the internet is this great thing that can bring you to all these people, but it also can just separate you from everyone else and allows you to go further into the recesses of one certain mindset. Yeah.
It can act as both an echo chamber of what you already believe, but it also has the potential to share views from someone, from many infinite number of people. I think one downside that is inherent to the internet is the fact that we don't see a human face connected to what we're reading or what we're ingesting in media, that we forget that there's another human person on the other side of the screen who we're interacting with. And I think that often ends up with a dehumanizing what the information we take in, that we forget that it's more than just us. It's more than just our nuclear community. I think that's detrimental to all of us, the forgetting that we don't have a single shared experience. We have many experiences that are very similar, but we don't have a universal human experience that is applicable to whether you're living in Antarctica, in northern Canada, to Brazil. There are certain things that apply to us all, but there isn't a single lived human experience.
Yeah, and that kind of contributes to like the volatility of something like Twitter, where people just have like, 5 word back and forths or something. It really limits like how much communication is available to these two people, and then that escalates because someone might see somebody say one thing, and all of the background they have on that one topic will lead them to believe an entirely different thing, and they just don't understand where the other person could be coming from.
Because
Mm.
you, especially with that sort of thing, with like the Twitter arguments or arguments on Facebook, that you're going into arguments often assuming that they've had the same experiences you have. So therefore, it can be disruptive to have someone coming with a different perspective that can seem more as a personal attack than rather just a different experience. That interacting with someone who has a different experience can feel like your own experience is being devalued in a way that is, because you're losing the human connection that you get. Like, even talking face to face like this, you have a better human connection because you can see the way you're in, like the facial expression that you're of someone you're talking to. You can hear the tone of voice that somebody's using. You can get the micro expressions. You can get the interaction of like, oh, they're making eye contact, they're actually thinking about this, they're not just blowing off what you said, because you don't get the nuances of facial expressions. You don't get voice, like how your voice sounds when you're interacting just via hard word on in 150 characters on Twitter.
Yeah, for sure. Which is kind of one of the things that is cool about the internet that I've seen lately is like the way that like my sister will use just like Skype or something, and she'll just video call her friends like all day because they can't be together as much as friends would usually be. And even like Snapchat allows us to kind of like take a video of ourselves, and it makes it a lot more human. And so I think the internet is getting slowly better at making human interactions. But yeah, this beginning of the internet, which is like changing the world and probably will continue to change the world for the next 100 years, has been very impersonal, and it's kind of suffered for that. Yeah.
It is definitely becoming more personal with time, and I'm sure it's been brought up in at least 2 or 3 of my English classes, as well as just in most classes that I've taken that have dealt with human interaction, whether that be science or, the theology classes that we have to take in English, and even languages to a certain extent, that acknowledging the fact that so many things that we see on the internet is only one perspective of what they want to show us, that it's harder to tell if someone's being genuine, and but also understand that what you see may be different than what somebody else see, and that doesn't take the genuineness out of it. I guess it's a struggle to find a balance between having boundaries and like understanding you can't put everything on the internet because that's not safe for you or for other people, but also being like, yeah, I'm being honest with myself, I'm not misleading other people. It's a hard balance to find, and I think we're all working towards it, and I think there are people on the internet are exploiting that, but it's something that we will continue to work through as we work with the media that we have.
Yeah, I mean it's with any kind of medium or platform that's really made to connect people and do well. There's always going to be, I think, people that are either going to be exploiting it or something, whether it's for their own gain or just because they're bored. I mean, you're right, but it is. I think we are moving a little further into trying to do a little better with that. But again, there's still a lot more to go with in terms of the experience that you get from it. Yeah. You mentioned English classes. Uh, Personally for me, I mean honestly, personally for me, I think just my English classes, I think throughout my life, so not just at St. Joe, have always been my favorite just because of the types of things you talk about, and also the fact that I don't know, I like writing and I like just talking about that. I'm not a fan of grammar, so I didn't like those English classes. Yeah.
I So many people like look at me as like, oh, you write, you've gotten awards for writing, can you proofread this for me? Sure, I'll proofread it for ideas. Big concept. Grammar? Whoo!
Yeah.
Grammar is something that I've been struggling with forever. I can't spell for anything. I could not spell to save my life. I'm a phonetic speller through and through, and English is not a phonetic language, so no matter what they tell you, it's not. But that's a different rant.
Yeah. But like English classes specifically, I think at St. Joe, they've been very eye-opening, definitely different than, I mean, I think that's with any high school. Classes are going to be a little more eye-opening in terms of the high school. But I mean, I can't remember. Beans, you said you weren't in my class freshman year, but you did take closer, right? Or no?
Yeah, I did take closer.
No, I was in your class. Yeah,
We
I
were
think
in the same class because
all
we
three
made
of us.
Tello together.
Yeah, but I think all three of us were in that class.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
possible. I think we were all in the same class that year.
Yeah.
yeah,
But
for
that, I
sure.
mean, just talking about that was like kind of my first, I think, experience. I think specifically that one kind of opened me most to like poetry and what poetry is. A little less of writing essays, more I felt like we could, after that class, either you could dissect poems like pretty perfectly, or your brain died before you could get to that point. So you just couldn't do anything after.
Yeah, closer definitely exposed us to a lot wider variety of poetry than I think at least I had been exposed to in grade school, as well as looking as like being able to understand metaphors and similes in a way that like understanding the deeper meaning of what someone could be trying to communicate in, pardon me, um, in a poem or in writing in general. Poetry is such a fascinating way to communicate because you're not coming out flat out and saying, I like X or I've been through X. It's communicating the events through emotion in a way that prose doesn't always communicate. And I love writing poetry because of that. Poetry in my mind is like the color of art. It's like being able to see all the way words work in poetry are like the way colors interact in art. It's you create images out of words that on their own have no great significance in a way that can make something that's been written 100 years ago still applicable, and we can still feel that emotion in when we read it today, even if we don't recognize the exact references or don't understand the exact metaphors. We still can take that emotion of what the writer's been trying to share in a way that we can understand the emotion they're trying to evoke in a way that's fascinating and beautiful as any art piece, any painting that you can see. And you can hold it in the palm of your hand in a way that art isn't necessarily as shareable in a lot of ways, especially big paintings that you can hold a book of poetry in the palm of your hand and it's with just as much beauty as the Mona Lisa or Van Gogh's water lilies. That it's such an interesting way of communicating in a way that transcends time and place and even background to a certain extent.
Yeah, I was thinking about when you were talking about like doing 3D art, I was like, yeah, stories aren't usually that concise and visceral except for like poetry, you know. You can really get that visceral with words. And it is kind of like, you know, weird to think because yeah, usually words, you know, they kind of build up, they kind of you got to get these characters, you kind of got to build up a scene. But with poetry, it just gives you like flashes of different images that you kind of have to piece together. Yeah.
It's like walking down a row of houses and you just get a blink into each window. And so you get a 5-second glance into somebody else's world. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think poetry. I may be wrong, but at least in terms of my experience, poetry is like the one form of writing to me that can get away with being so sporadic and just everywhere, and it still makes sense. It takes you a bit, but it still will make sense after you read it like 15 different times.
Poetry is like they give you all the rules. You spend so much time learning all the rules. You can't do this. You should do this when you're writing. And then they give you poetry and they break them all. You break all the rules you've ever been given in writing. But you can often get the most meaning out of something because of the way somebody breaks the rules, because the way the grammar's been using, because of the lack of punctuation, can convey different emotion. That breaking of a rule can convey a different emotion than just having it written out and with all the proper grammatical rules or the way the formatting is supposed to be. It's poetry is something that takes time to understand, but once you kind of get the swing of it, opens your mind and your ideas open to completely different perspective of seeing the world.
Yeah, I feel like looking at poetry and looking at even a lot of music, even rap coming up, like a lot of it is a lot more direct than grammar will let you be sometimes. You know, they're able to cut right through grammar to write what they're saying. and so like it creates something more more immediate and something that feels more urgent than writing a piece.
Communicating with the emotions without necessarily all the stumbling blocks or the formalities of proper grammar or proper formatting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. So
Yeah, we've that was that was good. I like talking about that stuff and just getting lost in conversation about things that are normally hard to keep up with in like an English class, but for some reason talking about it with just people, and I'm not being made to talk about it. That feels a little better. But we
or being
do.
made to talk about it by me, Scholar,
Yes,
right?
it's come on, Beans. You know I'm the one making you do this.
But yeah, that's true. That's true.
But I do want to just so we have the time, because I wanted to mention the upcoming school musical. It only comes to mind because in like a few hours actually after this recording you got to go audition for it, which is fun. Beans, are you doing this?
For sure. You know,
For
I'm
sure,
out
yeah.
here.
So we have
Yeah.
we have two pretty much probably definitely future cast members here. Do y'all know exactly specifically what it's going to be about, or what it's called or anything?
So the musical itself is Godspell. I had just learned about this, so I have absolutely no clue what the play is about, or because I haven't taken the time to look actually like detailed into what it is. I'm kind of just going with the flow of it at the moment, but it looks like it'll be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. We got some like 70s rock and roll songs in there, so it'll be interesting.
Just like
70s rock, nice.
as well as like some gospel vibes. I don't. It's
Yeah,
interesting. It's an
for
interesting
sure.
combination.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what we do with it. I'm kind of excited to see who gets cast in what role and stuff. It'll be an interesting one, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so because we talked about it earlier in this podcast existence back in like the first episode, but will this one be in person?
So yes, the as far as we know at this point,
So
our
far,
goal
yeah.
is to be in person with as many COVID safety precautions as possible. Um, it's being done instead of being done at Bethel this year. It'll be being done in the main gym at the high school.
Okay, so it'll be at the school, which is interesting. I've gone to one play in the past, but I hadn't gone to most of them before because I thought they were going to be at the school, and then I was like, okay, I'll just show up to the school, and then the night of, I was like, oh, I don't want to, I can't get over there. But yeah, I think that'll be cool that it'll be at the school this time. Um, I don't know if that makes for more people. Does that make for better, more like more people there, or is that less seating? Is that going to be less people there?
Uh, I
Less seating, for
probably
sure.
less seating. Yeah,
I mean, because of COVID, there will be less seating anyways. But yeah, we're talking about bleachers versus like, I don't know, how big is the auditorium at
oh,
Bethel? It's pretty big. So
that's fairly big, but we don't usually fill it up all the way.
yeah, but yeah, so there'll be less seating and probably less people. But yeah, we'll
Or
make it work.
is there a particular role either of you really are going after, or you're just going in there to audition and hope that you get cast?
I always audition, but I enjoy the roles that just through body language is more how I like taking roles that are more heavily just communication through body language than actual lines.
Um, I definitely have complete faith in whatever AJ casts me as. And so yeah, I don't really have a role in mind. I bet they have a role in mind for me. I don't know. But yeah, but like yeah, that first play I did, I feel like they cast everyone perfectly,
That was
and yeah,
I love that. That was an inspector, which was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, it was really fun. It's good that we're able to do in person now, but honestly, I would take another Zoom play. That was interesting
Mm,
format. That was an interesting way of playing with it.
yeah,
Definitely was interesting.
that one was weird. But yeah, so hopefully, yeah, we'll see. I kind of like lines with dialogue. But yeah, I don't know. I've played a few weird guys. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm usually insecure guy, so
Insecure.
so yeah. So if there's a character who's really insecure, that'll probably be me.
Ridiculous.
I don't know what that says about me, but
I mean, I get cast when being cast for like more like specific characters tends to be the bumbling idiot.
yeah, I know. I was about to like say, do you have like beef with Sarah or something? Like she's just like you're gonna play all the dumb characters.
Actually, I find those characters a lot of fun to play. It's like, oh, like the ones that lack intelligence ends up being very fun to play because they end up like there's so much room to mess up and not end up like throwing off the entire thing. It's like, I don't. The character doesn't know what they're supposed to do, so I guess it's okay. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do either.
That's fair. That's I'm jealous now. Shoot. You and Sarah are bros. You've been getting the easy roles.
Yeah, Beans, are you sure you and AJ don't have beef? What's going on, man? He
Don't
thinks you're
have
just
beef?
insecure.
Yeah, dang. Maybe. It's like Beans has no emotional backbone. I
You
only
just
cry like every other week, AJ. Alright, I'm
you
not that
just
insecure.
you just show up for your audition and he goes, "We don't need to hear it. You're just gonna be the insecure guy," and you're like, okay.
You're gonna be insecure guy 3, and it'll be
Why can't I be one? Because you're not that insecure. Not even good enough for the part we've already
yeah.
casted you as.
I have to build like an emotionally unstable environment so that I can play the most emotionally unstable character.
That's a great way to prepare.
That's a great like movie idea. Someone
What,
just ruins his
a guy
life.
that ruins his life for preparing too much for his roles.
Yeah, I feel like that's already been a movie.
It's definitely already been a movie.
Acted.
Probably, maybe not specifically that, but definitely that format. If it's
Yeah.
smart, someone's probably already thought of it before we did, Beans.
Give yourself more credit.
Nah, I don't know. I don't know, man.
Yeah, all right. We can talk about acting in general. What do you like about acting?
Um, Honestly, I like the being able to communicate necessarily without words. I like that words aren't necessarily mandatory in acting to still convey large amounts of emotion with that like there's so much variability in theater that every time you do a piece, a production that you've been practicing for however long, 6 months, whatever, in each night you do it, it's slightly different because you bring who you are to each night, and if your emotional state has shifted in any way, you kind of shift that reflects out in your character and in the general piece. That and it's not a single piece that's been made and is static. It's a very dynamic art form that I think it can even reach a lot more people than writing or art because you're interacting with the emotion of the actors on stage, and the actors on stage are interacting with the emotion response of the audience. It's almost like a conversation, like between the actors on stage and the response you get from the audience, because every night you're doing it for the audience. You're doing, as well as doing it for you're often for your own love of acting, you're doing it to get a response out of the audience to see like we've done this for you and want to see like how we know often if we're doing like a comedic piece like the last few musicals that St. Joe's done that I've been able to participate in, it's often like you can tell if the um, audience is enjoying it through how they respond, through laughing and knowing if kind of if jokes hit. If oh yes, see, doing it for the grade schools is already always hard because they do not react at all. And that's hard when you have an audience that just does not react at all. It's like, cool, I have no clue if I'm doing this right now, because I have, like, I'm doing the lines, I'm reciting the lines, I'm doing the things I've practiced hundreds of times at this point. I just don't know. It's like, okay, y'all just aren't reacting. Thanks.
Yeah, I've heard people like Marie, and I think I've heard Beans say that too. Sometimes when you guys go do the grade school performances, you come back and you're like, should I quit acting? It wasn't good. No one clapped.
Laugh, no one laughed at the jokes. But I think that's partially because I think that's with the younger kids performing for them, like, they don't really understand how theater works in a way that they don't really understand it. It's okay. It's okay when you like it. It's okay to clap when everybody else is clapping. It's okay to laugh at the joke. It's like, you're good. Please, we want to know how you feel about this. As long as you're not trying to distract the actors, you're okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've definitely heard this. I think it was even Joe Rogan talking about this, where he said he doesn't do schools anymore because it's like he was at his friend's birthday party, and they had Stone Temple Pilots for some reason at the dude's birthday, and he's like, "Ladies and gentlemen, you're not gonna believe this, Stone Temple Pilots." And he said they did their whole show. It was amazing, and nobody paid attention because they didn't know he was gonna be there. And nobody really cared. I mean, that Stone Temple Pilots were going to be there. Nobody really was there to see Stone Temple Pilots. And so when you're performing for people that don't want to see you there, it's just not going to be the same as performing for people paid to come and see you.
Yeah, that's kind of something you run into with the grade school performance because it's just often another school day for them. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, cool, we're out of the classroom, but it's also just like, oh, we have to sit in a dark room for 2 hours while other people are talking up in front of us. It's like, but that can be having an audience who isn't there to actually enjoy it, or who didn't want to be there, you don't get the same amount of emotion or response you would get from an audience who's like came to see the show because they wanted to see the show, even if it's just to support family members.
Yeah, and you would think like the solution to that would be like, okay, well then let the grade school kids know you can get let out of school early or you can come see a play. And you guys are great, but I think most grade school kids would just be like, I want to go home. And we would have no one to perform for, and it would probably be worse than performing in front of a dead audience.
Yeah, it's often because like we did Guys and Doll, we did Good News, we did Music Man last almost a year ago. But they're often older shows that especially grade schoolers don't get the references. They don't get the jokes. That even some like of our peers probably don't get the references that are being made because they're not references to like they're very time specific, decade specific references, or that would be very funny for the people who like lived through that and saw that and like that's funny to them because that's a shared experience that we don't have. So
Yeah, I remember watching your virtual play, and I've never seen Game of Thrones. So about halfway through, I had to ask my mom, "What is that supposed to mean?" Because her and my dad have watched Game of Thrones, and I knew it was based off of Game of Thrones, but there was so much stuff. I was like, I don't get it. This is weird for me. And then I was like, oh, that's what that is. It's Game of Thrones. I've never seen Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also King Lear, because it was an adaptation of King Lear. So.
Yeah, that too. I mean, I understood. I didn't know the story, but I understood most of it was probably based off of King Lear.
that was definitely an interesting production to do.
Yeah, that was a weird one.
Yeah, that was weird.
All right, but I got a question. So as a writer, how do you feel about, because I just imagine being a playwright, and that would be so like terrifying, but also like exhilarating to know that like you're gonna have people like give their all just to one character and try to fully realize this. And it's gonna create a more fleshed out piece possibly, but they might also deviate from what you want, and that's gonna like be like, no. Don't.
I think that's kind of the perils of writing theater, writing things that are going to be produced by more than one person, or being produced by someone who's not yourself. Because you're adding new dimensions, not only how the viewer's perceiving it, but how the actor's perceiving it, and that shifts how you would write something, but also how it's like, to a certain extent, you don't have control over how someone chooses to act a character, or how the audience perceives that character. Sometimes you need to be more specific if you want a character to act a specific way, but you're always going to run into interpretation because, again, each actor is bringing their own life experiences to a character, which will influence how they end up acting that character out. And I think that's one of the benefits of theater, because you can't plan for the human emotion as much as I think some people would want to. But in general, you can't plan necessarily for the viewer, for the reader, for whoever's taking in what you've written or acting out what you've written. You can only put out what you've been feeling in a way that you hope other people can connect to.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like you mentioned, the true feeling, the human connection on stage. You can't plan for that as much as you can any other form of art. You could kind of plan for it in like film, but still, even then, you have to. There's multiple cuts. If it's just in the moment, it looks better even in person sometimes. So yeah, that's a good point. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are about out of time. This was a great episode. Thank you, Mary, for coming on. Thank you again. And also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, but Happy New Year to you three and everyone listening. It's crazy. This is the first episode of BeansTalk in the new year. Let's hope 2021's great. Let's make it great. Let's just do away with 2020. Let's just forget it even happened. And everyone have a great 2021. Like I said, thank you, Mary, for coming on. And Beans, would you like to take us out with an improv outro?
I forgot to prepare or shoot.
That's the beauty of it. That's why I don't tell you about it until now.
Skull, you scare me. All right. This is a statement on how 2021 is just gonna be 2020 again, and you're doomed to repeat 2020 because you said you would forget it, Scola. This is all your fault. Don't forget 2020. 2020 forever. Beans out. Goodbye.
Oh, that's a great way to end the episode. Thank you, Beans. See y'all.
You're welcome.